how is HP going to realize any kind of leverage from autonomy? And that's a question that only they can answer. They certainly spent a lot of money.
That's IBM's chief of software, Steve Mills, in 2011, talking about Hewlett-Packard's $11 billion acquisition of Autonomy. He's trying to be a gentleman about it, but barely manages to keep from laughing like a hyena. Less than a year later, HP faced an $8.8 billion write-down for the $11 billion acquisition, marking one of the biggest financial fiascos in tech history. But what did IBM know that HP didn't? And as a man faces life in prison for committing fraud with what was once considered the UK's brightest tech company, do we really believe that HP didn't know what they were getting into? Today, I want to tell the story of HP's acquisition of Autonomy, and I want to set the stage for a US Department of Justice trial that could see one of the world's former tech stars spend the rest of his life in a US prison. Let's dive in. I want to start by hopping in a time machine and going back to 2011, a time where we were all party rocking, watching cable TV, and still figuring out how our worlds were about to change thanks to social media. Both IBM and HP were legacy computer hardware companies that generated good steady revenue and good steady earnings. The tech boom was treating them fine, but the growth at the time was all in software. The advent of the internet had made Facebook and Google market stars in the consumer software sector, and Apple had managed to bundle must-have software and hardware to create consumer electronics products that were in the process of becoming the most popular of all time. The buzz in the business world at the time was all about big data. The internet explosion had set off a realization that data was worth money, and we were making more and more of it all the time. The companies that could gather it and collate it and make it useful became hot commodities. Some companies, like Oracle, had been in the big data business before anybody was calling it big data. They were in a position to take advantage of the trend coming around to the products and services that they were good at making. But the upstarts that had just started giving the market what it wanted had to get more inventive. This brings us to Autonomy. Autonomy didn't come out of nowhere. It was founded in 1996 by Mike Lynch, but it really got going when people started to come around to the idea that information was a commodity. Autonomy geared its offerings to take advantage of the perception that companies were drowning in data but starving for insights. Its intelligent data operating layer could understand and process vast amounts of unstructured data from various sources, like emails, documents, and media files, turning them into actionable intelligence. By all accounts, Autonomy did offer solutions that were highly effective in addressing the complex data challenges faced by businesses. The company made it commercial with a focus on selling to large enterprises, positioning their software as an essential tool for data management and analysis. Autonomy wasn't just selling a product, it was selling a new way of thinking about data, and it was selling like hotcakes. As Autonomy's reputation grew, so did their client base. They used aggressive sales teams and clever distribution methods to move software to deep-pocketed companies for big money. The median average price of Autonomy installations was $790,000, and the company boasted that virtually the entire Fortune 1000 group of companies were customers. Deals worth millions became the norm, propelling Autonomy's revenue and making it one of the fastest-growing software companies in the world. HP had been a hardware company since before World War II. They were practically part of the foundation that Silicon Valley was built on. And HP wasn't the type of company that would jump and bite on trends just because they weren't growing as fast as the market wanted them to. In 2010, Hewlett-Packard CEO Mike Hurd had HP branching further into consumer hardware by modernizing their consumer device section. At the time, they bought Palm Inc., the maker of WebOS. The plan was to use Palm's vast patent portfolio in new HP tablets and devices to compete with the world-beating Apple devices. But things got messy shortly after at HP. In September of 2010, CEO Mike Hurd was fired following a sexual harassment complaint. This brought in a new era and a new CEO named Leo Apotheker. He had his own ideas about HP's future, and they all had to do with big data. By 2011, Apotheker's HP was making a strategic exit from tablets and smartphones, essentially putting everything Hurd had spent 5 years and $20 billion building into the trash. Now, the company didn't have time to develop an enterprise software business. But who needs time when you got cash, right? So HP was on the lookout for a splashy acquisition focused on big data. And in October of 2011, HP acquired Autonomy in a deal that valued Autonomy at $11.7 billion, a peak valuation for the company. The market hated this shift. Shortly after the announcement, HP lost $30 billion in market cap, and the board fired Apotheker before the acquisition even closed. After the scandal and the failure, HP went on the hunt for an all-star. This search brought them to a current board member and the former CEO of eBay, Meg Whitman, who took over as the CEO of HP in September of 2011. She was tasked with cleaning up the mess that Apotheker left behind. By November of 2012, HP had written off $8.8 billion from the Autonomy acquisition. There's no question that HP overpaid. The $11 billion purchase price was 79% above Autonomy's market value. The overpaying wasn't a secret. As we talked about at the start of this video, Steve Mills from IBM knew exactly what HP was buying. So it's hard to imagine that the HP C-suite didn't know that they were paying too much. But paying too much is common in hot acquisition markets. The problem here, as HP executives tell it, is that HP overpaid for a fictional company. In other words, Autonomy had been cooking the books. And now, 12 years later, CEO Mike Lynch has been extradited to the US to explain himself to a San Francisco courtroom. Now, Autonomy CFO at the time of the acquisition, Shashivin Hussain, has already taken a federal fraud conviction for this scheme, and both he and Lynch have faced long, drawn-out civil fraud proceedings in the UK, which they both eventually lost. According to the prior trials, the racket worked something like this. Autonomy moved much of its expensive enterprise software directly to the businesses that used it, through their internal aggressive sales team, and some of it through a network of more than 400 resellers. Sometimes the resellers were brand names like Accenture, HP, and IBM that bundled Autonomy's products with their own offerings. Other times they were off-brand middlemen. Closing a big enterprise software sale takes time. Sales teams and resellers sometimes work customer accounts from cold to warm over a period of several months or even years. That's just how long it takes for these companies to make decisions and plan their integrations. Autonomy can book revenue from a software sale once the client has contractually agreed to buy it, but only then. They can't count revenue from sales they haven't yet closed. A company angling to be acquired needs to show growth. If this quarter's numbers don't beat last quarter's numbers, prospective buyers might take their time making a bid, or they might even reduce their offer. But if the line is going up, they might overpay to keep from missing out, much like HP did. According to former Autonomy employee and eventual government witness Christopher Egan, when Autonomy was in danger of missing quarterly growth targets, they would take deals that the direct sales team were working on but hadn't closed yet, sell them to resellers, book the revenue for the sale in the current period, and then backdate the purchase orders when the deals eventually closed. The resellers wouldn't have to do anything for their part in the deal. In fact, according to Egan, the Autonomy sales team didn't want the resellers contacting the customers at all, in case they would screw things up. The reseller would be able to collect the commission when the deal closed and return the software if the deal didn't close. But in the meantime, Autonomy could book the revenue as a sale to the reseller and put it on the books. It's a cute move because as long as the customer eventually buys the software, there's no invented revenue, and it's easy for the executives running the scam to convince themselves that it will all work out. The revenue coming into Autonomy on an artificially shortened timeline makes the company look like a money fountain. Artificially accelerated growth like that is bound to catch up to a company eventually. But before it caught up to Autonomy, HP had bought the company for $11 billion. A civil suit in the UK has found Lynch and Hussain civilly liable for defrauding HP, and the SEC has done likewise stateside. But the Department of Justice in the United States apparently doesn't think that that's enough. The DOJ is obviously much higher stakes. We go from civil penalties, i.e. cash, to potential jail time. Which, given how stressful this whole ordeal has turned into, might not be that bad for Mr. Lynch. Here's an interesting clip of Martin Shkreli talking about his time in jail.
You know, there are like accidental like byproducts of prison that are good. You know, that's what I got to do in prison. I read hundreds of books and it was great. I didn't like other things, but that part I liked.
So you mean to tell me for most of your day, there's no stress and you just get to sit around and focus on a book? It honestly doesn't sound that bad. Now, Lynch could go to jail for up to 25 years if he's convicted. But in the end, if the government is successful, who are they really getting justice for? Hewlett Packard? The same company whose CFO didn't even read the due diligence report the company paid KPMG to compile. Lynch is now going to try to explain to a jury that a dysfunctional HP that couldn't decide what direction to go in or even who its CEO was going to be at the time signed off on this deal and is now crying because it didn't go the way HP had hoped. And that Autonomy may have sold aggressively and put its best foot forward, but that wasn't a crime. Nobody made HP make this acquisition. Again, a competitor, IBM, was baffled by the purchase price. There was no secret that Autonomy had issues. Now let's go back to today's lawsuit. The government is going to try to convince the jury that Lynch and the Autonomy board members knew exactly what they were doing, that they knew it was wrong, and that they made material misrepresentations to HP, defrauding a storied American institution in the process. At the risk of sounding like I'm siding with Lynch here, it's interesting to me what kind of white-collar crimes the government decides to prosecute as a fraud. Matt Levine always says everything is securities fraud. Well, in this case, the victims of this alleged fraud are Hewlett Packard shareholders whose company was in the midst of doing something foolish, careless, but bold. They were gambling on big data, something no one understood at the time, but now we can see some value in as we enter a world of large language models. If HP told themselves Autonomy had the potential foundation to turn into what is ChatGPT today, that $11 billion bet would have made some sense. It's hard to believe that the executives at HP didn't know exactly what they were buying into. If we go back to the 2008 financial crisis, the fallout that followed felt like a financial crimes epidemic. If misrepresenting sales figures is fraud, surely misrepresenting the value of a mortgage portfolio or a mortgage derivatives portfolio is a crime as well. That fraud put the whole economy into a nosedive, not just HP. But we didn't see any fraud prosecutions or any real effort to take down anyone. So I guess it's just one of those things. Clearly someone at the DOJ really doesn't like boring old British men who win at capitalism. But if you ask me, when it comes to stories like this, we often glaze over the people who placed a bet lost and then cried victim because they say they were fooled. We don't look at them and say, hey, maybe you just placed an educated bet that didn't work out. All right, everybody, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Also, let me know what you think in the comment section. Thanks, everyone.